Esteemed members, a warm good evening to each and every one of you. The weather in your respective cities would have changed by now. And we see pleasant weather being returning back. There are rains, cool breeze, and we have said goodbye to summer. And we are bringing a refreshing change in the form of a new topic today in the Board of Internal Audit, where Bhavani Joyce is going to lead us through that very, very important new topic. So there's a change here also. I welcome each and every one of you wholeheartedly. I also have here with me, sitting by my left, CA Charanjot Singh Nandaji, who is by position, he's a vice chairman, but then he is the chairman for this committee because he's one person who has led us by example, who shows the way, and all these webinars, etc., which are being held are basically his motivation. We also have Aarti here, the secretary to the committee, very able secretary. Arun also is there. I welcome each and every one of you. And as Nandaji used to say, the internal audit is one of the core functions. It is a sunrise profession as far as the profession of auditing is concerned. And today, when we have Bhavani, who is going to speak to us, in fact, she'll be introduced formally, but then when I read her profile and also what she's going to speak, I was amazed. And I also envy because she knows something which is very important. She knows something which is extremely interesting. And those of us who are going to participate today in this program, those of us who are fortunate to listen to her, are certainly privileged lot, I must say. And those who could not, of course, they will certainly be able to do in future, near future, as and when they are able to hear about her talk today. So welcome to you, Bhavani, and thank you for your sparing your valuable time. And Nandaji, welcome to you.
Thank
and
you.
I request you to please give your brief opening remarks and then take the over to Nandaji.
Thanks a lot, Brother Rajendra Kumar, the GST man. So my salutation to Bhavani Joyce, Madam Aarti Bansal, the secretary of the board, Arun Agarwal ji, and Hemil, the technical support. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that internal audit essentially is a management function. You report to the audit committee or to the board, as the case may be. And more importantly, it adds value into the entire initiative of empowering the board through your knowledge, through the information which you pass on to them. Today's topic is a very interesting topic. The name of the topic is Conversation Intelligence for Internal Auditors. Very, very important. How things have to be put in the right perspective. How reporting has to be in such a fashion that it adds value to the initiatives of the management. The vision, the mission of the management, coupled with controls, are very important. And it is very rightly said that where control mechanism becomes weaker is the breeding ground for frauds. So I will not take much of your time. We have one of the very revered speaker of the day, Madam Bhavani Joyce. So I would just want to read her resume. Give me a second's time. Let me open it and then come back to you. Give me a second's time. So Madam Bhavani Joyce is AVP and co-head of internal audit and SOX at Infosys. She has been coming consistently and speaking at our forum. She is executive and leadership coach and trainer at the Evolving Way. She is an internal auditor par excellence. She is a respected leader in the field of internal audit and risk management with over 25 years of experience. Don't go by her looks. She has deep experience and insight into this profession. She co-heads the internal audit and SOX function at Infosys and has played a key role in driving transformation through automation and analytics and by elevating the position of the internal audit team value as value-adding business partners. Let me tell you that she has been recently pivoted from a full-time corporate life to a part-time role as co-head and embarked on her journey as an executive and leadership coach and trainer with a vision to partner with the leaders, aspiring leaders and members of the internal audit fraternity in India and globally on their individual and collective journey to personal and professional fulfillment through mental fitness coaching and power skills training. Prior to Infosys, she had a stint at one of the big four as internal audit practice head. She has also worked previously in UK for 15 years, including as director of risk and assurance at Cancer Research UK, UK's largest NGO. She is a regular speaker and trainer of internal audit, and she has been invited on the board of internal audit standard board numerous times. I would like to tell you that you have to listen to her before you start believing that she's a master of the subject. She can add value to the entire initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to add with a couplet. The couplet is in Hindi, but I'll give the English version also. The couplet says, "Ghar khairat mein milti kamyabi to har shakhs kamyab hota. Ghar khairat mein milti kamyabi to har shakhs kamyab hota. Fir qadar na hoti kisi hunar ki aur na hi koi lajawab hota." It means that if you could get competence by charity, then nobody would have been outstanding. So if you want to make an outstanding like our chairman, most commonly known as the GST man, C.A. Rajinder Kumar P, or Madam Bhavani Joyce, who has created so much value add to this great profession of internal audit, it is only possible by your consistent indulgence, hard work, and dedication to the subject. Not standing between you and Madam, I would request Madam Bhavani Joyce to take the things forward. I give back that dais to see Aarti Bansal, who is the secretary of the board, to take the things forward. Aarti, the dais is all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I cordially welcome to speaker, our chairman and vice chairman, to this webinar on internal audit. First, I would like to thank you, ma'am, for sparing time to be the speaker of this program. And I would like to thank you to our chairman, vice chairman, as a cart cannot move without a wheel. And just like that, committee cannot work without the leadership of chairman and vice chairman. So I thank you to our leaders, our chairman and vice chairman. Now I hand over the mic to our speaker to take forward the session.
Thank you, Aarti ji. Thank you, Nanda ji. Thank you, Rajendra sir, for this wonderful platform for me to share my thoughts on this topic. Without further ado, let me share my screen and let's get going. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Aarti ji, can you see my screen?
Very much, madam. Very much. Please go ahead.
Fantastic. So as some of you might have already met me over these platforms, I have been speaking, I think this is my 5th time or so, speaking on an ICI AI platform on internal audit. The topic I've picked today is a new topic. I've not presented this before in these platforms. It's on conversational intelligence. It's a topic that's very passionate to me. I studied this topic about 7 years ago, when I had the good fortune of learning under the creator of this particular concept, a lady called Judith Glaser. You'll see the footnote here. A lot of the material here is adapted from her work. There is a fantastic book called Conversational Intelligence. I encourage all of you to read it. It's got nuggets of wisdom for life, I would say. This wonderful lady is no longer with us. She passed away about 5 years ago, but from cancer. But the moment she knew that she was, on the unwell, she started to share a lot more of her work through training coaches around the world. And I was one of those people who signed up for her program many years ago. What I found very interesting about this topic is that it is applied, applicability is universal. It is applicable to your conversations with your family members, your friends, your peers. But I'd like to bring it from the context of how it works in internal audit conversations. But I would invite you to please listen to what I want to share from its applicability to your whole life as a whole. I think you will find a lot of value coming from that perspective. As you all know, internal audit, while there's a lot of technical capability and competence required to be a great auditor, today with the evolving nature of the corporate landscape, the evolving role, with the influx of technology, internal audit, the necessity for human skills is even more increasing than before. We are expected to influence, engage, collaborate, co-create, create value, all of those things. And that's not going to happen by purely taking a technical or a business stand on a particular engagement with a stakeholder. At the end of the day, internal audit enters a very personal space of the stakeholder, because they've done day in and day out, they've come to work to run their role, or to conduct their role, to run their function the best way they can. And as auditors, we step into that realm, or that safety zone of a stakeholder or a process owner. We effectively enter their home, and when you enter home, and internal audit by its nature can be quite, I wouldn't use the word antagonistic, but it can be quite, it can shake somebody's comfort. And it's necessarily so. And so as internal auditors, we have a very huge responsibility to conduct that role with a lot of integrity and a lot of patience and a lot of understanding of what's going through for the other person. One very important skill to do that is your ability to have a great conversation. So that's the crux with which I am going to be sharing my thoughts today. I also want to, as I've been introduced, I am the co-head of internal audit and SOX at Infosys. I have a co-head who runs the function with me. And I also have pivoted about 15 months ago to pursue my kind of passion in executive coaching and training. So I run I have two roles. I'm in the good fortune, I guess, of being able to do both. But what I would like to also call out is the fact that all of the thoughts that I expressed today are those of mine and mine alone, and not that of the organization I work for. On that note, let's move on. Yeah. So what will be covered today? Very important before we get into conversational intelligence is really to understand how we as human beings process the world around us. There's so much data that we receive through all of our senses, and how we take in that data and process the data in our minds actually underpins how we interact with another human being. And so the first thing I'll cover today is a little bit about the process, the science behind how we engage with the world around us. Then I emphasize a little bit about why conversational intelligence is really important. Because of this, the first part, which is how we process the world, conversational intelligence becomes that much more important. Then I also talk about what are some of the aspirations we should have from the point of conversations for internal audit. So what are some of those aspirations we should be carrying with us on how we want conversations to unfold in an internal audit context? I then will take you through some of the neuroscience of conversations. It's a little technical. It's about the chemical reactions in our body when we have a conversation with another person. I think it's very important to understand the neuroscience of conversation, because you can't control chemical reactions in your body, but it's important to understand that these reactions are happening, and that it's happening for the other person. If it's happening for you, it's happening for them. And therefore, by understanding it, by noticing when it's starting to happen for you, you have more control over how you then react to somebody's words, somebody's body language, and somebody's tone, and so on and so forth. There are 3 levels of conversation as presented by the author of Conversational Intelligence. I'll take you through those 3 levels and what each of its purpose is and what we should aim for in internal audit. Then I also talk about what raises and lowers your CIQ. Basically is the short form for conversational intelligence. I talk about what can raise it and reduce it, then give you some tools on how you might now start to practice and become better at conversational intelligence. And then we leave with some encouragement for you to experiment. You will see the term here is experimentor, intentionally spelt with MENTOR, because at the end of the day, life is all about trying new things and experimenting. And when you mentor your own experiment, you basically look at your experiment from a very neutral space, a very non-judgmental space, and say, okay, I tried this. It worked, it didn't work, what can I do differently? So I encourage all of you to become experimenters of your new skills. That's the agenda for today. You will see throughout the document that I have a QR code here. That's basically a QR code to my LinkedIn page. At any point, if you can get your phone out and scan it, it's there on every slide. So I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am starting to write a lot more about these topics, particularly in its context for internal audit. So if you do connect with me, you will be able to have access to some of these articles as they come out. Without further ado, let's look at, oh yes, one more thing I want to say. If you stay till the end, then there is a QR code towards the end, which will give you a link to a short, I would say not an ebook, but a short note that I've prepared on some of the tools that you can download and read at your leisure. So it's only available for those who stay till the end. So I encourage you to stay till the end and download that little 4-pager that will help you get deeper into some of these concepts. Now, let's look at this image that's on screen right now, which basically says, why do people react differently to the same experience? I am sure all of you have been in situations where you did something and one person reacted in a particular way and another person reacted quite differently. If this was a more interactive session, I would probably encourage you to share your thoughts, but considering we are in a webinar context, let me share some of the background to why people behave differently or react differently. At the end of the day, the person speaking here, the person kind of shouting here at these two individuals in this image, is doing the same thing to both people, right? He may be angry, he may be upset, he may be having some urgent deadline. So he's shouting at these two team members of his. But team member one reacts by just getting very flustered, throws away his papers, maybe walks out, I don't know. But team member two gets up, puts on a smile, goes up to another person who could help her, and takes the message from the shouting she experienced and tries to solve it. Now the question is why, right? And that's kind of what leads me to my next slide, because in an internal audit conversation as well, two very different reactions could come up when you're having a very similar kind of presentation to a group of individuals. Somebody might say, put their hand down and say, I don't agree with this observation. Somebody is probably silently processing it and then tells you at the end, actually, you're absolutely spot on. Somebody else might say in the meeting, actually very encouraging words and say, I'm glad you brought that up. Now, why is that? Because I'm certain that you presented it the same way to all three people. And that's because we interact with the world around us quite differently. And I know this image looks a little complex, but I would encourage you to stay patiently with me on this particular slide, because it's probably one of the more important slides. So how do we interpret the world around us? As you all know, every human being has 5 senses, right? We've got the eyes, the ears, the skin or the touch, the nose, and which for smell, and our mouth, which gives us taste. There is actually no other way that you could receive information from the world. No other way. Maybe intuition, the sixth sense, perhaps. I don't think there's enough research about how that comes into the context of this, but that's probably the 6th element. But these 5 are universally available to all of us. Of course, there are those of us with some challenges that may not have access to all of our faculties, but nonetheless, all 5 senses are available. However, we are all created differently. We are all raised differently. We come from very, very different backgrounds. So the meaning of what we take in is quite different. The stories we hold in our minds are quite different. So and another very important thing is each of us have different preferred senses, right? So some of us are very visual, some of us are very kinesthetic, which is very touchy. We like touching things. Some of us like auditory. We like to listen to things. That's how we consume information around the world. Now, in an internal audit context, right? There are plenty of triggers. Plenty of triggers, right? You've got in a conversation, new risk information, sudden escalation, something unexpected happens. All of these things come to you in multidimensional triggers. They come visually by somebody, like in the image earlier, somebody standing and raising their voice. It could come in a form of a nasty email escalation. It could come from the body language of somebody not willing to cooperate. It could come from the silence in a meeting. I mean, sometimes the silence can be frightening. So all of these triggers are received by our senses. And then what happens? What happens, it goes through this filtering process. Why do we need to filter? The body, the mind cannot absorb and process everything. Impossible, right? We would all collapse, I think, if we try to process every single bit of data that our senses received. Now, so when we look at selective processing and we look at filtering, something happens. Each of us will take in and process and store different pieces of the same set of information. You are in the same meeting, in the same context, listening to the same auditor, listening to the same stakeholder, but each of us takes in different information using our senses to process. And then we store that, and that becomes our reality. And hence now my reality and your process owner's reality of the same situation is very different. Now, how can we expect the same reaction? Now, what happens in this process of filtering? There are three things that typically happens. One is we delete some information that we think is not important. So deletion happens. So we store the gist of what we observe, but we delete something. Now, what we delete and what somebody else deletes is not the same. Another way of making it simple for us is we distort. So, for example, we might see a stakeholder who is very, very busy, and every time you make a phone call to try and connect with them for a meeting, they're not available. And rather than storing the information as they're very, very busy, we store the information as they're avoiding the audit. Two completely different messages has been stored in our mind. One message says, this person is extremely busy. I need to be conscious and careful of his time. Another person has stored the message as they're avoiding the audit. And why is this important? I'll just come to explain. Now, and then generalization is basically where there's a lot of similar kind of information, but we store it as something general. If it happens 3 or 4 times, we generalize. Let's say you're auditing the HR department, and the employee relations person, the BPHR, and the benefits person, they're all having a similar kind of reaction. Not quite the same, but similar, and they're not very cooperative. What are you going to generalize? The HR department is not a very cooperative department. That's a general statement. But we've stored this now. We've stored this in our memory, this version. And if you were to go back and kind of unwind that, what led to that perception, it's quite difficult. Can be done, but there's a lot of information. Remember, we've deleted and generalized and gotten rid of. So what led to that perception that we've stored is not always accessible for us. But what's important to note is two different people, every one of us stores our experience in different ways. We've created a new reality of the same external environment. Now, there are other things as well that play a role in how we filter. The time and location of something happening, the mood that we are in. We woke up late, we were very upset, etc. So how we process the world around us changes when we are in a different mood. There's something called meta programs that's more about like your hardwiring. There's a lot of research that shows that memory has the DNA carry forward from generation to generation. Even memory, even culture can come through our DNA. And therefore, certain meta programs comes from the inherited nature of how our hardwiring is. Then there's language. You can see this in India especially, right? There's so many, we speak so many different languages, and the camaraderie between people of a similar language, when they can share a rapport and a closeness because of language, and for somebody who has got a different language, and how that might get stored in them in their hard drive, I guess, the mental hard drive. Then you have memories, decisions, beliefs, values, identity, and the list goes on. And these are all filters. Now, because all of these are different for different people in the audit context, and you go into an audit meeting and somebody is just coming from another company versus somebody who's been in that same company for 20 years. And you're auditing the same kind of process with them. They're both running, say, something in the IT department. Both of them will have a very different set of filters. The person who's been in the company for 20 years has a different set of memories, filters, experiences than somebody who's come out from a different company. So the reaction will be quite different. But as auditors, we need to understand that this is what's happening inside that head of the other person. And so the reaction can be quite different. Now, what happens after this filtering happens is you go and have an internal representation. You store an image in your head. And that image is kind of like a hard drive imprint that you've got and stored. It's your version of that whole situation, your reality stored. That image is basically what we call thoughts. And that thought leads to a state. What's a state? A state is an emotional situation. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm confident. These are states, right? So there's a image that's stored because of all this filtering. Then there's a state, which is one of those emotional situations. And it's our emotion that really results in what we call physiology or action. And so when we are happy or confident, there's a different kind of physiology. What's physiology? Heart rate, perspiration, all of those things are physiology, right? So when you're happy and confident, your heart rate's a little bit more calm, you feel very energetic. And as a consequence, the action you take is quite different from somebody whose state here is anxious, worried, heart rate's gone up, they're a little bit flustered, they're not able to think clearly, and then a different action. And the irony of this loop, it's actually a loop, because the action of a person who is confident results in a different kind of processing that happens, and a different kind of thought, and a new state and a new action. And the action of a person who is worried or anxious results in a different loop of events. So I just want to give, I know it's taken a bit of time to explain this, but I want to give the context of the fact that how people process the information and the world around them in the context of life and in the context of internal audit results in a very different kind of memory storage retrieval system, a different reality that has been created for them between two different people, between you and them in the same meeting. Now, moving on. Sorry, you've got that. So there's a mindset, then there's the interpretation of that event or the data taken in, and there's a response or behavior. And as I said earlier, everything that we see and we process, we store as, we store as part of our senses recording mechanism. So we store it like, wow, feeling great because of the flowers in the garden, or feeling great because somebody said, well done, it's a great report. Feeling bad because somebody, because somebody, pointed out that you missed two very critical controls that you missed to review. All of these are images that we've stored. Our focus is exactly what we focus on. So if we, and I always tell my, kids, for example, if you're looking for something, you will find it. If you're looking for proof that somebody is not being cooperative, you will find it. You find what you focus on. And your memory will, and what you find, you will go and find in your mind, in the memory system, and say, see, it's proof yet again, because you've already stored an image. You've stored an image that they're not being cooperative. You were looking for that sign, you found it, and you reconfirmed in your mind that exactly what happened. But actually, if you step back and if somebody was watching this whole process, there could be 1,000 different interpretations as to the memory we stored. Now, why is conversational intelligence really important? I like this quote from many, many years ago, I think. Pentagon's spokesperson, Robert McCloskey, said, I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. I'm just going to leave that there for 5 seconds. Because I think that's so powerful. And that's really the crux of conversational intelligence. And I want you to just imagine this in your internal audit conversations. I know what you believe. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. Because this is a reality, and this is how things happen between two people, we need to be very, very open-minded when we have a conversation with anybody. And hence the skill sets and the understanding behind conversational intelligence. Now, what is a conversation? This is something that Judith, the author, it's a famous slogan. She says, getting to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of the culture. Culture here is about the interaction between two people, right? Culture at the end of the day is basically the things we do, and the things we do with each other, which depends on the quality of the relationship. So the culture, the things we do with each other or for each other or to each other, depends on the quality of the relationship, which depends on the quality of the conversation. And I think that's extremely powerful. If you can get, it's like, we do, as auditors, we do root cause analysis, right? The conversation quality is the root to the relationship quality, which is the root to the culture quality, which is the root or the source of greatness. And hence why conversational intelligence is really important. And this quote, which she quoted in one of her live sessions, I don't think I could find a written record of this quote. A conversation is the only way to touch another person without actually touching them. You can actually hug a person with a lot of emotion and love through a conversation, just over the phone or in person, but actually never have to touch them. They're so touched by the quality of the conversation. So that's how powerful conversations are. And I think if you can relate that back to the quality of your audit conversations, I think magic can happen. Now, let's move on. What is conversational intelligence? So based on, and this is the book I was talking about. I always have this book on my desk. Sorry, one second. Something happened. Yeah. I always have this book with me whenever I have, a moment waiting for an auto or something. I keep reading it. That's Judith Glasser. She passed away, like I said. She really fought cancer twice, but she, lost at the end. But what she said, and by the way, she started researching. I think she died in her mid-70s, and she started being curious about conversations from the age of 14. She only wrote her book in the early, I think 2012 is when the book came out, or 2014, but she started researching this topic since the age of 14. And if you watch some of her videos, she says what really intrigued her into conversational intelligence was the fact that her father, who was had a stammer or a stutter, who did not engage very well in class and was not a very top performing student, was invited to a 10-minute conversation with a teacher, 10 minutes, one-on-one. And something happened. She said, she has no clue. Of course, she was not even born then, but something happened in that conversation that led to her father transforming from being somebody who was unable to speak to being invited to, he said the teacher told him to get on stage and act, because acting is different from speaking. And he was a great actor. And then he went on from success to success and eventually became an ambassador for the United States into, I can't remember which country. But the point was, she was curious as to what happened in that 10-minute conversation that transformed the life of a person. And it was from that point that she started researching, and she had thousands of recorded conversations or research or interviews about what made conversation successful or effective. And then using all that knowledge, she basically distilled it into this framework. So what she says is conversational intelligence is a hardwired and learnable ability. So it's both hardwired in us, but also learnable to connect, navigate, and grow with others, a necessity in building healthier and more resilient organizations in the face of change. So she says, basically, some of us have the gift or the hardwiring to have great conversations, but the beauty of it is when you break it down, it's a learnable ability. And conversational intelligence begins with trust and ends with a high quality relationship and business success. And you will see throughout my presentation the constant emphasis emphasis on trust, because trust underpins high quality conversations. And, I'm sure you all can understand how important it is to have trust as a key ingredient in your internal audit relationships. The amount of opening up that happens if your stakeholder or process owner trusts you to have their best interests at heart, they will open up everything to you. But how do you get to that place of ultimate trust? Your right to audit does not entitle you to trust. Trust is not something you get because you have a role or a designation or a right to be somewhere or do something. Trust is something you earn, and it comes purely from the connection you build with another person. So, and conversation is the gateway to that. So in the context of internal auditors, I think there are a couple of things that we could aspire for. One is moving from transactional to relational, to a relational approach. What do I mean by that? And like I said to you, I'll come to it a little later. There are 3 levels of conversation. The first one is a transactional conversation. I ask you, what is the time? You say it's, what's the time? It's 5:39. That's a transactional. It's a, ask you a question, you give me an answer. It's purely that. Moving on from transactional to positional is the second part here, is I try to influence you about my perspective, and you try to influence me about your perspective. That's positional. So transactional is I ask, you answer, you ask, I answer. Then the next one is positional. I try and influence you, you try and influence me. And the third one, I would say relational or collaborative, is where both of us really want each other to succeed. And we want to really understand each other so that we can create something grander and bigger than both of us. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of will and willingness to actually get to the point where we want each other to succeed, and we feel comfortable enough to not be right and to be curious instead. But the whole idea with conversational intelligence, and I think it's very important for auditors, is to how do you move from asking and getting answers, or being asked and you giving answers, to trying to say, hey, I found this observation and I'm right, and you need to understand that this is the observation I found, to actually really being curious. I found something, but let me hear you out, like really, really hear you out. Not hear you out waiting to find a gap in what you said, or hear you out waiting for me to then answer and give my point of view again. Not that kind of hearing. Listening to say, actually, what is behind what they're telling me that's leading to this kind of observation to exist? Now, that kind of conversation between an auditor and auditee can lead to wonderful outcomes for both the organization and the individuals involved. And that's kind of what I mean by higher auditor-auditee engagement. Can we go from, can we take our conversations so that we get to a point where the engagement between the two people gets to such a high level that the auditee is willing to call you at any point and say, hey, I really need your input. I trust you immensely that you're going to help me sort this out. And I want to get it right. And you are the best person for this. That's the kind of trust we're talking about. And the other aspect is sensitivity to power. I know we could do a whole session on power dynamics in internal audit, because who's the power who has the power in an internal audit conversation? Or engagement? Is it the auditor because he's got the right to be here? Is it the auditor because he's got the ear of the audit committee? Or is it the process owner because it's his process? He's the expert. Anything the auditor can say can be, countered by the expertism of the process owner. So who has the power? I don't have the answer. It's a question worth exploring. But conversational intelligence gives you the ability to be sensitive to these power dynamics, to understand that you are both equal in that conversation. And that leads to collaboration, approachability, and frank two-way feedback, transparent two-way feedback. Hey, your team did this. I'm not very happy with that. Hey, I'm sorry I did this, and I know that didn't settle well for you. Two-way transparent feedback. And that leads to building stronger relationships and finally co-creating powerful win-win outcomes. So these are some of the aspirations, I think, as internal auditors, we should carry with us as outcomes we want from our conversations with our stakeholders. So let's break it down a little bit more and talk about what really happens in a conversation. Number one, we assume others see what we see hear what we hear, and think what we think. I'm sure you all agree, right? We assume for a moment in that conversation that the person we're speaking to sees what we see, hears what we hear, and thinks what we think. First part that happens. And we don't realize that trust changes how we see the reality, right? How much I trust the other person changes how we see the reality. So if I don't trust you, I see a very different kind of reality, and I'm storing a very different image of that reality than you are. And so that's the second thing that happens in a conversation. When we are upset, we can't stand in the same reality with others. When we're upset, we can't stand in the same reality with others. Because you just cannot, your mind just cannot allow you to empathize with the other person the way you should when you yourself are upset. The chemicals in the body, in your mind, just will not allow it. But we think, hey, I heard you, I really understood you. You know, if you are upset, and only you know if you're upset. Now, the other person may know if you react and show that upset, but some people are very good at being upset and not showing it. But their mind is already creating, you know, the 5-part mini-series of a movie about that person, or this relationship, or this audit. And there's a whole reel going on in the head. And often we're not focusing on the other person. We're focusing on what's going on in our head. And it's fueled with being upset. You cannot possibly relate to another person when you are already upset. And I know, I mean, I as much as I can speak about these topics, I'm also human, and I have found myself in that situation many a times, being upset, thinking I get your point of view, but I actually don't get your point of view. And then we assume we remember what others say. We remember but actually what we remember is what we think the other, what we think about what they said. Because like I remember I told you in the beginning, somebody's telling you something, you have created your filters, you have created your internal representation, your version, and that's what you remember. That person doesn't know what you stored in your head. You thought you remembered what they said, but you actually remembered what you thought about at that moment about what they said. Now that changes everything. And then the last one, we assume that the meaning is in the speaker, but actually, when I'm speaking to you, for each and every one of you, you're taking in my words, my body language, my gestures, and you're going through the same thing I explained earlier. You're filtering my thought, my words, you're filtering my slides, you're storing what's important to you. So who is giving meaning right now? Am I giving meaning to this conversation, or are you giving meaning to this conversation? Or at least this presentation? I would say that you are giving meaning to this. So the meaning is in the listener. So this is what really happens in a conversation. So how much control do we really have about what the other person understood? Almost zero, right? And to add to all of this, I want to add one more aspect. I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of mirror neurons, but these are, how do I say, these are transmitters in your mind, right? So we all have these mirror neurons. These are transmitters that actually share information between each other without any verbal communication. Okay, this pause on this first statement for a minute. And there's been a lot of, I don't have all the research with me, but there's been a lot of research to prove that mirror neurons can help share information between two people without the need to have any verbal communication. And I'll tell you where you will notice this happening most. You know, especially between peers, right? You don't even have to, if you really know a person very well and you like that person very well, you can both think the same thing, and you know the other person's thinking the same thing without saying a single thing to each other. Now let's go one step further. You go into a room of strangers, and somehow your mind, your body just straight away goes and finds the person that just somehow has the same interests as you, connects with you really nicely, you know, amazingly connected. How did that happen? How did you decide? How do you find that one person or the two people that connected so well with you? You didn't know they were standing in the left-hand corner of the room, but mirror neurons have been shown to transmit information through the waves without any verbal communication. So what this means is we're communicating even when we're not communicating. So, and the reason I say this is when you go into an audit conversation and you are thinking thoughts that are unpleasant or unproductive, or maybe you are doubting the other person, but you're saying the right thing, you're saying, very appropriate words, you're framing good sentences, you're really trying to convince them, but your mind is thinking something else. They are feeling it, they're sensing it, they're probably receiving mirror neuron signals about it. So it's important to align what we say with our thoughts. And if our thoughts are troubling us, saying, hey, I think there's something wrong with this evidence or something, conversational intelligence will help you get to the place where you can comfortably share your thoughts as they are. Right? Many a times we sometimes suppress these thoughts and say what we think is the right thing to say, but actually we think something different. This is a very important aspect to think about. And knowing about conversational intelligence also gives you one other advantage. Remember, I told you about the chemical changes that happens in our body when we receive information, etc. Knowing that change is happening gives you the power, and knowing the concepts of conversational intelligence gives you the power to change that chemistry as the conversation is progressing. So moment to moment, you now get the power to change that chemistry. Now, it takes practice. This doesn't happen overnight, but knowing that it's possible itself is one step forward. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the neurochemistry of conversations. So this is based on the work of conversational intelligence, but an article coming from an article in the Harvard Business Review talks about managers' positive and negative conversational behaviors. Now, let's start from the bottom. The bottom talks about the kind of behaviors that are resulting in stress-causing chemicals or hormones. So cortisol is basically the culprit hormone for stress or for negative emotions, right? So you might have all heard of this statement. If you haven't, you can do some research about it. But cortisol is a nasty hormone. It's important. Let me be very clear, and I'll explain a bit more in a minute why it's important, but it can have devastating effect and it stays in your body for a long time. Cortisol, once released, can stay up to 24 hours in your mind, in your bloodstream. Oxytocin is basically the hormone for bonding or for love, for connection. And then there are other things, other kinds of behaviors that a person can show. And I know this article has been done based on managers' behaviors, but I think you can relate the same to an internal auditor's behavior or a stakeholder's behavior in a conversation. I want to focus this conversation about all of you as auditors, because that means you have control of what you want to do about that behavior. Oxytocin stays in your body for 5 to 6 hours maximum. It's the same hormone that is responsible for the bond between mother and child. It's the same hormone that is released in a woman to actually deliver her baby, and so many other things. Oxytocin is very, very powerful love hormone or a bonding hormone. Cortisol has negative results in negative experiences. It results in stress. Now, first, at the very base of this, right, which kind of happens, which is the strongest point of cortisol releasing behavior, is that while the other person is saying something, you have negative emotions which are actually preventing you from even listening. You are in the room. You are in the room, you are in the conversation, but you have some kind of anger, frustration, something that's going on in your mind that's preventing you or detracting you from listening. I am sure you've been in those conversations. We've all been in those conversations. That's one of the highest cortisol producing behaviors, but it is kind of this is what I would call absolute low trust side of the conversation continuum. Then you go to the next stage. You get a little bit better. You pretend to be listening. You nod your head. You say, yes, sure. But actually, your mind is completely focusing on what do I say next. You're not really listening. You're not genuinely giving them the ear. And I say you, it happens equally for the other side. Pretending to be listening is still a low trust behavior, and it's still a cortisol producing behavior. Then you go to the next stage with this, which is you are speaking, they are speaking, and you're getting frustrated by the fact that they're not understanding you, right? Oh my God, how many times do I have to say this again and again? I've explained it 5 different ways. They're not understanding what I'm saying. We have this addiction as human beings to being right. And being aware of that need to be right itself is a very powerful step forward. Because when you realize that there's this need, you're now able to release that need and say, okay, actually, I've been stuck at trying to be right. Maybe I should just be open-minded and listen, and I will get more wisdom from genuinely being open-minded than trying to influence the other person or convince the other person. So moving on from being frustrated that others are not understanding you, you are now focused on convincing them. This is still climbing up. We're getting towards trust, but we're not quite there yet. So here we're trying, okay, we've got this ad time, we're having a conversation. I'm now focusing on trying to convince you that I've got the right way forward, I've got the right answer. This is still releasing cortisol. And then you've now, you're hearing them out and you're saying, I don't trust the other person's intentions, right? Now, until this point, you're still releasing cortisol in your body. So when you are stuck in this kind of behavior in a conversation, or you're seeing, by the way, this is important equally on the other side. If you're seeing this kind of behaviors from the other person, remember that they are also releasing cortisol. And what's happening, therefore? They are in high degrees of stress, right? So you are releasing cortisol, they are releasing cortisol, both parties are in a high degree of stress. Now, this is the point. This is the tipping point between not trusting the other person's intention and the willingness to have a difficult conversation. This is the tipping point from where you go from cortisol release to oxytocin release in your body. When you are willing to step over this line that says, I don't trust you, but hey, let me tell you what's actually in my mind transparently. I'm not going to try and convince you, not down here. I'm going to tell you what's actually in my mind, and I'm open to I know it's going to be a tough conversation, but I'm open to having this tough conversation, is when you step into the place of starting to build trust. And oxytocin, when it starts to get released, your trust, your trust meter starts to go up. So when you start being open to having a difficult conversation, you say, look, I think this is going in circles. You want to succeed. I want to succeed. I know it's going to be a tough conversation, but let's put everything on the table. That's when you start getting into this territory. And I'm sure if you go back to your audit conversations, regardless of what level you are, you might be just starting out, you might be a senior department head of audit. All of us are every day in these situations. So the moment you go and say, hey, let's put everything on the table, let's really talk about it. Let's agree to disagree, but let's be very transparent. You start even being transparent in a tough conversation releases oxytocin. You know why? I'm starting to care for you. I'm starting to, right? I'm starting, and I believe that you are starting to care for me. Now you go, okay, now that you've understood, you've put everything on the table, everything's out there, all the pain points, all the differences of views and opinions and concerns and frustration, you can start to now say, hey, how do we paint a picture of mutual success? What does win-win look like for both of us? What do we want out of this? And as you even saying that sentence or that question, hey, what does win-win look like for both of us? Both the listener and the speaker will increase the release of oxytocin. Now go on further. So somebody says, this is what win looks like for me. This is what win looks like for me, etc. There will be a lot of things that come up is from a place of curiosity, right? I didn't quite get what that meant, or what did he actually intend to say by that, or what is she saying? So this is where you stimulate discussion and curiosity. You ask to clarify. You ask questions to clarify. Hey, you said that. What did you actually mean? And so on and so forth. Even that is an oxytocin producing behavior. And I'm giving all this based, I can try and see if I can send you the article at the end, but this is all based on research on what happens when people move up this continuum of behaviors. Now we go on, and after we ask open questions to really clarify, iron out the gaps. we say truthfully what's on our mind about what is possible as a way forward. And then we start to show genuine concern for each other. We really want each other to succeed. We are at the height of releasing oxytocin. Now, the whole idea with conversational intelligence is the ability to move from down here to up there. That's really the crux of what this whole framework is all about. Now, I'm going to move on. I want to take a minute to talk about the brains, the various brains that we have in our system. And because I talked about, there's actually 6 brains. This image has 5. I'll tell you about the 6th one as well. These are the brains responsible for different chemical releases or changes in our mind. It's very important to know because these brains work differently, process information differently, result in reactions differently. Now, when you are on the roadside and there's a car coming towards you at a high speed and you know you are in danger, what do instinctively? You jump out of the way. You might fall on the side, but you jump because it's about survival. Now, the brain that's responsible for survival is your amygdala, right? This amygdala, very, very important. Small, tiny brain. It's a primitive brain, part of your limbic system. What is the limbic system? The limbic system are the parts of the brain that are responsible for your automated actions, like breathing. All of your automatic things happens in the limbic system. Survival is also a very automatic response, which is why it's interesting that research has shown that when you are in a tough conversation, when you are in an argument, a confrontation, the amygdala is lit up. If you go under an MRI scan and you do an imaging of your brain when you are in an argument, the brain part of the brain that lights up is the amygdala. Now, why is that important to know? A, amygdala is automatic. The response is automatic. 2, it is very fast, extremely fast. It's what we call the fast brain. It's the brain responsible for judgment, right, wrong, good, bad, safe, unsafe. It's very fast. Now, if you're in a conversation and somebody is doing something that maybe you go into a meeting and they don't even give you eye contact as you enter the opening meeting of you are already nervous about this audit. It's the first time you're doing it. It's a complex. You've heard news about this department head. He's quite tough. You go into the meeting room. He doesn't even look up and give you eye contact. And you're like, already your amygdala is activated. It's like, oh my God, it's going to be a tough one. Now, if you don't realize what's happening to your amygdala, if you don't realize it's releasing, what is it releasing? Amygdala is responsible for the cortisol release we spoke about, right? This cortisol release, the amygdala is responsible. Now, if you don't realize this is happening, before you know it, your mind is the whole negative story about it's going to be a disaster, it's going to be a tough audit, I don't know if I'm going to succeed, etc., is already starting to form, episode 1, episode 2 of the internal audit mini-series. So very important to know that there is this thing called the amygdala, very fast, very responsive, survival brain, cortisol release. Now, we have something called, there's something called the executive brain, something discovered quite more recently, not a very long time ago, which is basically your, what we call it. We call this the prefrontal cortex, the executive brain. It is a smaller brain, which is basically the highly advanced thinking, processing, analytical brain, rational brain. This is the part of the brain that actually is able to say, okay, I know that person is not giving me eye contact. I know that person is upset with me, but actually it could be a lot of other reasons for this reaction. So I'm not going to allow my amygdala to take over. I'm going to slow down, take a deep breath and go with the confidence I know I have. Now, to even tell yourself all that, you need your prefrontal cortex to be operational and activated to help you block the effect of the amygdala. Am I making sense? I hope so. I can't get your feedback, so I'm going to keep going. But so the prefrontal cortex is the brain that is actually responsible for your thinking, your rational decision making, counteracting the unwanted reactions of the amygdala when actually it's not real danger, but it's there, right? Now, why was the amygdala very active? In those days, when I know many 100 years ago, when people were survival, they were hunting, they were living in the wild, being, danger was all around the corner. The amygdala was the most essential brain for their survival. But we're not in that kind of world anymore. So, but it's still there. Remember, I talked about inherited functions such as the amygdala. There's DNA memory that is handed over on how the amygdala needs to work, and so it continues to work that way. And we need to really be conscious to not let it take over in situations such as office meetings and things like that. So the prefrontal cortex, when you engage it to rationally think about what's actually happening, what could be a different meaning to what's going on here? Why is that person reacting that way? Is it personal or is it not personal? That's where the prefrontal cortex comes in. The difference and the important thing to note is that the prefrontal cortex is like a battery operated brain. It's not connected to the main system. So people who lack sleep, for example, and I don't know how many of you get your enough hours of sleep, but lack of sleep is a reason for why your prefrontal cortex is not in your best control. So, and food and exercise and all of these things need to be right for your prefrontal cortex to be effective. And why sleep? Sleep is effectively when you charge your brain. Like when you put your phone for charge, your prefrontal cortex gets charged when you sleep, because everything that you went through that day, all the decisions you made, all the thinking you did, it's kind of all floating in your prefrontal cortex. But remember, it's a battery operated brain. It needs its fresh battery charge for the next day. When you sleep, everything that's in the prefrontal cortex gets stored in your neocortex. The neocortex is your endless supply of hard drive, which has all the memories from the day you were born, maybe even what you inherited from your past generations is there in the neocortex. And those of you who are familiar with hypnosis and things like that, you can actually find ways to tap into the memory storage of the neocortex, even though your prefrontal cortex cannot remember it. If you ask yourself to remember, I don't remember, but actually you have experienced it. So like when you're a child and you went to some zoo and you saw this wonderful animal and you were 3 years old and you can't remember, actually it's there somewhere in your head. And that's in the neocortex. Sleep allows you to file your memories in the correct way. Disturbed sleep, insufficient sleep cause distortion between neocortex and prefrontal cortex is not clear. The hard drive is not clear. The recycle bin has not been emptied. And then you get fogginess, and that affects the quality of conversations. Then you have the heart brain. There's research shows that concept of feeling, right? Between the heart and the gut, both of these are other brains we talk about, because there's some intuition in the heart and the gut about the right thing to do. So all of these come up as as I would say, the wisdom of the 6 brains. Now, what happens in a conversation? When we talked about, remember we talked about the cortisol releasing thing, right? As such situations occur in a conversation where fear gets activated, or there's power play in a meeting, or there's uncertainty, and you feel there's a need to survive in this meeting, or in this conversation, or you've activated this need to be right. All of that's releasing cortisol. And the trust network, which is basically your prefrontal cortex, where your oxytocin release happens, comes from transparency, relationship, understanding, shared success, etc. So this is just an overview of the brain cocktail that happens during a conversation. I'm going to move on. So the threats activate your cortisol. Anything we consider threats, and forces are the things that activate oxytocin. In my next 2 slides, I'll just talk a little bit more about what are some of the things that are threats, and what are some of the things that are forces that can actually activate cortisol or increase the release of oxytocin. Now, when I talked about the agenda, I said we'll talk about some of the things that help you open up in a conversation or close down in a conversation. Now, threats cause cortisol release, which then tends, you end up closing down. There are 4 kinds of reactions that happens when you feel threatened. You have the fight. How does when we say fight or flight, you might have all heard this term, right? Fight is basically when you react aggressively, you say hurtful things, you shout. That's also a survival technique. almost an automatic survival technique. And if you drive, and I live in Bangalore, if you drive in Bangalore, then you can see a lot of call activated reactions in the fight mode, because people start shouting when the auto comes in this way and that way, because they're threatened, they're frustrated by what's happening on the road. Now, the other reaction could be flight, right? Where you basically want to get out of that environment. So when you jumped out of a fast car, that was a flight kind of reaction, get out of the way. Likewise, you walk out of a meeting, you want to get out of that place. The whole body and mind wants to leave that threatened environment. The other one is freeze. You stay there, you do nothing. You can't even get the wisdom to leave that environment. Neither are you fighting, neither are you flying. You are just freezing. You are just there, no reaction. And I'm sure you've seen that. You're in a conversation and it's a heated conversation and a person is just sitting there saying nothing, doing nothing. That's freeze. And then the other one is, now the new one is called appease. Now, another method of surviving uncomfortable, threatening situation, especially in conversations, and somebody is raising their voice and saying, this is not right. Yes, sir, sure, sir. Yes, ma'am. Of course, ma'am. You're not agreeing to a thing that they're saying actually, but you are saying yes, yes, yes again, because you are appeasing to get rid of the tension and the threatening environment. None of these are helpful though, right? Because it's a lose-lose situation. No one's winning in this argument. No one's winning in this conversation. So what are some of the things that cause cortisol release or threaten to close down a conversation? Number one is the tone, and I'm sure you can see it comes in that in the order of threat. So tone of the other person, how hurt you felt or you feel about what they said, the risk of rejection. I like, and auditors, I've seen this many a times. You work really hard and you come for with an observation you thought is right, and before you can even finish presenting it, the stakeholder goes, absolute nonsense. You guys have not understood at all the risk of this particular area. You're just going around in circles. There's no value in the audit you've done. Automatically, your cortisol release will go up 100%. Until you say, maybe there's another reason why they're reacting in that way. So risk of rejection, exclusion. There's in today's world of FOMO, fear of missing out, exclusion is definitely a threat. So you're having an important conversation going on and you're not part of it, or you are in the room and nobody's asking you for a point of view. That's just as bad exclusion as not being part of the meeting at all. There again, you have every opportunity to invite yourself to speak in that meeting, but you are not, because you are not being invited and you feel that exclusion, and that could threaten closing down of that conversation. Anger is another one. Territory, again, very relevant to internal audit. My area, my business, who are you? What do you know about internal audit? What do you know about my process? You're just an auditor. You're not an expert in my area. Territorial thing. And of course, the last one, status. I'm the EVP. You are just a bacha of sorts. What do you know about, how can you even, you have no experience of what's going on here, or so on and so forth. Different kinds of status happens. These are all elements that threaten to close down a conversation. I know we don't have the opportunity to have a discussion here, but I invite you all to just think about which of these or something else actually is your typical trigger, because each of us have different. I might be very resilient to a loud or harsh tone, but one of you might be very affected by it, right? So those are the things that you need to, I would invite you to think about which of these aspects actually affect you the most, and then look out for it. Because now that you know about this, you know that these are the things that are going to get in the way of your high-powered conversation. One of the things that you should do as an experimenter that I spoke about in the beginning is to actually be very aware, super aware about the factors that cause you to want to close down in a conversation. It is unique to each of us. And look out, if you have a regular set of stakeholders that you work with, please be very observant to when somebody who is quite nicely engaging in suddenly stops talking or says something very short, does not engage so much. Something happened just before that moment that caused them to close down. That awareness is step one in building your ability to have super skills around conversational intelligence. Now let's talk about the forces. Sorry, yeah. Let's talk about the forces. There are there are plenty more. Okay, let's be very clear. There are plenty more forces, but these are just to kind of sink in with the name. These are just 6 of the kind of things that make you want to really open up, regardless of what level you are in the organization. If you got this kind of canvas available to you, your natural oxytocin release will happen. And as a consequence, you want to open up, they want to open up. One is fairness, right? If as internal auditors, it's a very, very important aspect. When you're presenting an observation, we have a tendency to report by exception, right? You've covered 8 things in your scope, you found 2 observations and you talk about those. But very important, you might not put everything in your report, but the preamble to your conversation, the importance, and it doesn't matter what level, I would say everybody has the ability to say, I saw X number of great things, but we found 2 things. That's fairness. That kind of canvas sets the release of oxytocin for the other person. They want to share more with you. Ownership, right? Do I feel a sense of ownership in this conversation? Am I part of this conversation? Which kind of comes as a reverse of exclusion. Am I feeling included? Reciprocity. If I give you something positive, are you reciprocating that with another positive vibe? If I'm fair to you, are you fair back to me, right? We look for reciprocity. There's a lot of research that's done on reciprocity, but this is one place it comes up as well. Cooperation, right? If I ask for something and you say yes, and then I react with respect to your yes, and I follow up and you act, and so on and so forth. Those are the kinds of things that result in opening up, sharing more. Expression, how I say what I say, the choice of words, my body language, my facial expressions, all of that helps you become comfortable, at ease, and open up. Now, status comes here too, but it's the other side, right? It's the lack of it. When somebody, no matter how senior, no matter what part of the department, no matter how different the department is to audit, when somebody releases their status and talks and invites conversation as 2 people wanting to do what's right for the organization, the power to open up conversations increases tremendously. So I would invite you to ask yourself, how many of you go into audit conversations because you are the auditor and you have the right to audit? I don't have an answer, and I'm just leaving it as a food for thought, because that, using the fact that you are an auditor and you have a right to audit and the auditors are here, actually operates in this space. It already starts to trigger the shutdown or the close down or the cortisol release for the other person, because status has been activated. So these are just some thoughts. I'll leave you with these thoughts. So moving on from there, if you remember this, if you remember this particular continuum I talked about, right? Going from self-centric, protective behavior resulting in cortisol release, etc., to being able to go to an oxytocin positive emotional space. This is where it kind of comes back. The crux of it comes here in what we call the conversational dashboard. The conversational dashboard, right? So, and this is kind of one of the IPs of conversational intelligence and the work of Judith Lasser. She said every person interacts somewhere on this particular framework or this continuum, right? And I want to take a bit of time to talk about this. On this side, and let's see if I can get just give me a minute, pointer. Yeah. So down here in the resistor space is what we talked about. My emotions are getting in the way of my engagement. I'm just, I'm pretending to listen. I'm here. I'm in the resistor space. right? Maybe why am I here? If I'm meeting you for the first time, why am I here? Something you said, something you did, something you didn't do has already put me in the space of cortisol release. Something, maybe nothing to do with the auditor. Maybe I had a bad fight with my spouse in the morning. Maybe I had bad traffic coming to work. Maybe my boss got me first thing in the morning and blasted me. I don't know, but I'm here. I'm in this place. I'm in the protect zone. I want to protect myself. The auditor comes along and says, okay, if it's an opening meeting, the auditor is asking some clueless questions, but people get triggered just because you don't know what you're talking about. I've seen that happen too. Who are you to audit me? You have no clue what you're talking about. That triggers somebody to be here. I low trust because this person is coming to audit me and has no clue. Could be complete opposite. I mean, the other end of the audit, you've come with observations that don't match with their understanding of risk. Low trust, resistor, right? So this is where, and the whole idea with conversational intelligence, how do we take them from I protect myself to we want to partner, which is over here, right? That's, if we can find the ways to get to this space, then we have magic between two people. So what happens after? Remember that five stages of cortisol and 5 stages of oxytocin in the other chart, right? It goes up to skeptic. I'm pretending to listen. I am basically, okay, now I'm slightly opening up to you. Let me see what he's saying. I'm going to try and influence you, right? So I'm a skeptic. As the conversation progresses, let's say the other person, or let's say you, right? Now that you've all been part of this session on conversational intelligence, you know that the other person is carrying different memories, different chemical reactions, different stresses. If you are able to put yourself in the shoe of somebody wanting to collaborate with them, every action you take to not react to their reaction. Every time somebody says something inappropriate, shows a unpleasant body language, doesn't make eye contact, crosses their arms, if you don't fall for that and say, okay, I'm going to be in this space. I'm going to be an expert. While the person is a skeptic or a resistor, I am going to be an experimenter. Every time somebody does something to put me off, I am going to observe and experiment. What is going to happen is, because of this mirror neurons and because it's what's called a contagion effect, my positive experimentation willingness results in their it breaks down their resistance. It just can't be helped. It's because the mirror neurons are like, I'm being kind, I'm being nice, I'm being willing. Automatically, their oxytocin starts to release and they start to move up here. And this is why I want to really emphasize on this. In a conversation between two people, if both parties stay here, it's a disaster. But if one person is aware that actually I'm in control of this situation because I have the power of conversational intelligence and I can start to do things which is basically not react to their reaction, not react to their fight, not react to their flight or their freeze. You ask an important question in an audit, somebody doesn't answer. Rather than reacting to their lack of cooperation, if you are willing to watch, wait and see, and move towards experimento, you will automatically pull them up to wait and see. Right now, so the skeptic is basically, okay, maybe I will, maybe I'll give him a chance. Here, I wait and see. I've given a bit. Let me see how they respond. Wait and see, right? So we are moving up, and this is the sweet spot between cortisol and oxytocin, because as you are willing to invest and still stick to the non-reactive, non-aggressive, non-upset kind of response, you are moving the person up this. And if you are an experimenter, you are observing is an experiment. Not reacting is an experiment. Saying something nice while things are still tough is an experiment. Asking open questions when your mind is shouting to you saying, I have all the answers and I want to tell you what to do. I know what to do and this is what I want to say to you. Telling never really opens up positive emotions. Telling actually is somewhere down here. You know why? Telling is actually quite self-centric. When I tell you what I know, I'm basically protecting myself. But when I ask you what you want to know, when I ask you what you know, I'm willing to take you up this trust equation. So there's another wonderful research around what constitutes trusted relationships or trustworthiness. Today we're talking about conversation intelligence. There's another topic on how to build your trustworthiness that talks about a person's willingness to basically just reduce their self-centricness, right? I am going to be asking open questions, even though I know all the answers and I'm an expert. By asking open questions, I'm bringing this person up into this experimental space. I'm willing to listen to their answer, even though it's not hitting the right spot, even though they are going around in circles, even though they're not answering my question, I'm willing to listen, because somewhere in that active listening lies some message they're giving us, some stress that they're going through, some lack of support that they're experiencing lies in their answer. If somebody is digressing, saying you ask A, B, A, and they're giving you, half of A and a lot of B, maybe they're not able to answer your question straight, but underlying that lack of answer is a message for an auditor. So, and hence we go up, and your amount of listening. Why did I say telling is self-centric? Because telling is down here. The more you listen, the more you go up the continuum of high trust. Okay, so now that you know that this is what happens in a conversation, go back and observe how your conversations play out and how much listening and how much speaking is happening. Who owns the conversation space? The more you own it, the more you are operating down here. The more you listen, the more you operating up here. I know it's difficult. I have had enough feedback for myself as well. I know I used to say a lot. I thought I had all the answers, but it takes practice. It takes patience to go up the listening. And when you listen and you ask a superb question at the end of listening, you have basically divulged all of your competence and expertise just by the power of the question. You don't have to tell somebody the answer to show that you know what you're talking about. I'm sure you've seen, some wonderful interviews going on where the power of the question reveals all the wisdom of the interviewer, right? They don't have to have all the answers to show that they are wise. Sorry. Yeah. So now moving on, I want to talk about the 3 levels of conversations. Just checking on time. Yeah. So I said earlier, right, there are 3 levels. The first level of conversation is transactional, which is basically tell and ask. I use this to confirm what you know. And I use this to basically tell you what I know. This is what you do when you go to the shop to buy bread, to buy a loaf of bread. How much is it? 60 rupees. Here it is. Thank you very much. Transactional. You might use this when you want to ask for some data. Can I have the HR master, please? Yes, no, simple, right? So this is what, this is the kind of conversation we use when we want to just confirm what we know. But if you use this kind of conversation to deliver audit observation, then you are expecting somebody to agree with everything you say, right? You cannot, if somebody reacts differently, then you end up going from tell, then you end up going to sell. So you can see this, right? First you tell somebody something, they don't agree with you. Then you sell, I try to influence you. Doesn't work. Then I yell, I raise my voice to make you agree with me. Doesn't really help because you want them to agree with you at level 3, not at level 1. And what you want to get out of this kind of conversation is I give you something, I take something, right? Give and take. Now moving on to the next one. This is positional. Inquire and advocate. So I want to advocate for a point of view and I want to ask you what you know, but I ask you what you know only to influence you or to defend what I know, not for any other. My addiction here is to be right. If you see, addicted to being right. The whole idea of how I have this conversation is to come away as a winner of being right. My point is the right point. You don't have a view. And so I listen to you. I have a conversation only to find opportunities to influence you, persuade you. Again, I invite you to ask yourself, how many of your internal conversations are happening at this level? I am certain there are many internal conversations happening at this level. Because you've done your audit, you have found an observation, you think your observation is right, and so you go and present it and you want them to agree. On the other hand, you also have pressure because the number of observations, the quality of observations determines how well you are potentially valued by your audit leadership or your organization or the audit committee. So you are sometimes stuck in this level of conversation of positional because you want to get out of it the fact that the stakeholders agreed to your point of view. But the next level of conversation is transformational. When we go to transformational conversation, we are looking to co-create. Basically, we want to discover what we don't know. So you present something and you present an observation, and you need to listen out for the answers of the things you don't know. You need to ask questions to go deeper into what you don't know. Not about proving what you know, not about confirming what you know, not about defending what you believe. Now, this is the level 3 conversation. But I hope you realize by now that the power to get to this is not by telling. In a conversation, it's not about answering questions. It's about asking. Asking curious questions about what you don't know will take you here. Now, of course, there is a risk with this. If you overuse, you will ask, they will answer, you will ask, they will answer, and we'll go in circles. So that is why when in the next slide, I talk about how we move towards transparently creating a view of mutual success. If you go into a conversation with 5 observations, or you're going to do an audit inquiry about some process, and they're not giving you the full picture, asking, pausing, taking a deep breath and asking questions about curious questions about what you don't know. What is their understanding of the risk? You have come with your understanding. What is their understanding of the risk? What is it? What is the underlying reason behind them not agreeing to your observation? What are they not saying? This is what, and the outcome here is to partner. So this, so one thing you have to do, and I think it's a great homework, is to go back and have your normal conversations, but ask yourself, where am I? Am I having a transactional conversation, a positional one, or transformational one? And how do I get from positional to transformational? That's the real question. Which comes to the next slide. Like I told you, right? There are 5, I think I mentioned, there are 5 stages, what we call priming for trust. This is the crux of this framework. There are 5 steps that you have to do to get to this transformational space. Number 1, remember I said that everybody comes with a degree of stories in their head about audits, and I'm bringing it back to audit context. They have their fears, their threats, etc. Being transparent about your fears, inviting them to be transparent about their fears, has a long way in getting to oxytocin release. So step 1 is, if there's something that's concerning you, maybe not in the meeting, how many of you send get consultation on the agenda for a closing meeting or a observation discussion meeting, that you get consensus on the agenda? How many people send a well-crafted set of issues, inviting inputs, not saying, I want to tell you what I found? No, this is some of the things here I really want to hear from you. I'm concerned I may have missed a few things. I'd like to hear where my gaps might be. Then you are creating a transparent space in which I am not here to tell you what I know. I'm not here to confirm what I know. I'm here to have a conversation where I feel I have not covered something. I want to hear from you. These are my worries. These are my fears. What are yours? Let's talk about it. Then when you go into and I'm talking about this is in the conversation, right? You need to listen to connect every single time, even if you know that person, you need, when you're going into a conversation, I'm saying this is a 1 hour, 60-minute conversation, you start with connection. So I am sure you all do it, but again, invitation to think how well you do it. Are you going straight into observation discussion? How comfortable are you to have casual talk, curious talk, listening to connect, build some rapport, get some oxytocin release to happen in the beginning? Simple thing, a handshake when you enter a meeting with absolute eye contact with the person actually has already been proven to automatically release oxytocin. Right now, I don't know if we do it. And today with the virtual world and all these Zoom meetings, I don't know how well they are. And the worst thing is people off their screens. I mean, we off our videos when we have calls today, virtual calls. Do you know how much we lose in the ability to connect when we off the screen? Because remember, one of the, I told you that we take in the world to our 5 senses. The largest every part of our brain has, every part of our sense is a different kind of brain to respond to it. The visual cortex is where all your images are stored, your visual representations. It's one of the most powerful and largest brains that we have. When you're off the screen, you've just shut down the ability of that brain to operate. Such a devastating situation that we're in today's hybrid online world. So if one thing you want to do immediately to fix that is go back and have the camera on when you have your online conversations, and see and be an experimenter of that experiment to see what starts to change. I had worked with somebody recently who, using this rationale, went back and told his whole team to on the camera. He said, they have everybody, even the juniors, they only did not know why. But when they realized that they were shutting down the visual cortex and the power of the visual sense to actually help them to form relationship, connection, etc., to see people's eyebrows go up, the opening of the eyes, and all of those reactions were lost because of the camera. They started to open on the camera, and a lot of things changed in this space. So think about, are we having casual talk? Are we trying to find, why do people connect? We connect because there's something similar. It can even be the weather. It can be the traffic. It can be something that we like about each other. Do we know enough about the other person to form some kind of connection? Even if the connection is about something at work or whatever, then use the visual connections. The third one is very important. Are we listening to be understood, or are we listening to understand? Very important, right? So the third stage, now remember, the other person has no clue that you now know conversational intelligence. They have no clue that some of you who have come today have gone through and have come up with these, processes and techniques. So when you go back and you listen to understand instead of listen to be heard or listen to speak, or listen to respond, without you realizing it, the mirror neurons and the vibes of that conversation will automatically release oxytocin for them. But I mean, like, really listen to understand, which means when you want to listen to understand, you cannot have a parallel movie going on in your head. There cannot be a parallel, okay, so, Mr. X is saying all of these things, and here is something that's going on in my head, and what do I say next when he finishes speaking? That's not listening to understand. That's listening to respond. So listening to understand means dispensing of a parallel movie going on in your mind during that conversation. Now that you've really listened to understand, what you end up doing when you listen to understand is you end up realizing the number of things the other person said that you haven't fully understood. Because if you really listen to understand, you will actually ask, what do you actually mean by that? Because you will not give assumptions. What we used to do before is that we used to say, he said A, B, C, D. I assume he meant A, B, C, D. Because that's what those words mean for me. So I have heard him and I have recorded that understanding. Remember, I remember what I thought he said, not what he actually said, but what I thought is only in reference to my memories. Listening to understand will necessarily make you want to ask more questions. What do you mean by that? How is that possible? What is underlying behind that? Etc., etc. Which then naturally leads you to come up with, okay, now I really, really heard you. I'm now going to listen to co-create. What can we do to mutually create success? These are your challenges. These are my challenges. This is what I want. This is what you want. But they don't know this. They don't know that you are going to invite them into a journey of co-creation. They are here thinking this is a typical audit conversation, but you know that you are now able to lead them to a path of co-creation. So what does it take? It most important thing is the willingness to tell the truth. When you listen to understand, the curiosity index goes up. You naturally leads you to the ability to look for possibilities for mutual success. What is the pain point that they need to solve, that if solved will help you as well, is your common ground for mutual success. And then what's the reality? Then you basically listen to close the gap. You were saying all of these things. These were the assumptions underlying what you said. This is what I understood. Let me tell you what I understood. Let me tell the truth, my truth. Remember, there's no real reality. There's my reality and your reality. The whole idea of the last step is to close the gap in our realities. right? Because I formed my own story in my head, my own vision, my own view. You found yours. If I want to succeed for mutual success, I have to close the reality gap. That's stage 5 of this process. Now I want to talk about, so those of you who've stayed here till this point, if you scan this QR code, you will get a download of a 4-page document. It's an insights and strategy document for internal auditors on overcoming conversational blind spots. In the beginning, I spoke about what really happens in a conversation. In fact, that what I spoke earlier was the 5 blind spots. This is worded slightly differently. And each of these blind spots have been expanded into how they end up coming in the way of good internal audit conversations and what an internal auditor can do in this 4-page document. So my encouragement to you is please download it and have a look at it. And I'm happy to take any questions. If you haven't got a chance to read it now, please read it after the session. Send me a message on LinkedIn. I can answer any questions that you may have. Now, moving on to recognizing your blind spots, right? Now, what is a blind spot? It things that are happening, we all have them. Number one, we all have them. It is absolutely normal as part of being a human being, but the blind spots cause you to miscalculate the quality of the conversation. It causes you to, they say 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. It doesn't hit the right spot. It's because of some of these blind spots. Number one, we assume that others see what we see, feel what we feel, and think what we think. Remember what I said earlier in the beginning? That's blind spot number 1. Blind spot number 2, the failure to realize that fear, trust, and distrust change how we see and interpret reality, and therefore how we talk about it. Remember that those red lines between cortisol and oxytocin, when you are in fear and distrust, you are creating an entire reel, a different version of the reality inside your mind. You're not even listening to understand. How on earth can you possibly have the same reality as the other person? Not possible. Number 3, an inability to stand in each other's shoes when we are fearful or upset. When we are upset, the amygdala has taken over. When the amygdala has taken over, the amygdala function releases cortisol, and cortisol interferes with the prefrontal cortex ability to release oxytocin. And you need oxytocin to stand in another person's shoe, because that's where empathy comes from. It is oxytocin that is responsible for empathy. When you are upset, you are already in the release of cortisol. It's in your bloodstream. The amygdala has taken over. You cannot possibly genuinely empathize with another person. So you need to come back up from that cortisol release into neutral and into the other side in order for you to get to the place of empathy. So assuming that you can relate to another person when you're upset is another blind spot, because we end up having a conversation saying, I was there in the conversation, I understood what you said. No, you couldn't, because you were upset with me at that time. How could you have understood what I said? Number 4, assumption that we remember what others say when we actually remember what we think about what others say, right? So when we go back and have a conversation, the other day you said this. No, I didn't say that. No, you said this. I know I was there. It's blind spot number 4. Immediate trigger for an argument with another person, because we've gone in there assuming we've remembered what they said. We remembered what we thought about what they said. If we realize that that is the reason for not having the same vision of reality, half the arguments in the world would disappear. And number 5, assumption that meaning resides with the speaker when in fact resides with the listener. I'm repeating what I said earlier, extremely important, and very, very powerful examples are given in this document for you to read and understand how these blind spots interfere with the quality of your internal conversations. I have a few more, just 2 or 3 more slides, and then we can go into some questions. So one of the tools for you is to acknowledge and identify which of these blind spots are relevant for you, which of these are actually happening for you. And when you, again, back to experiment mode, when you notice it, make a note. What can you do about it? Read some of the strategies in this document, see if you can apply it. Then there are a few other techniques, right? Now, reframing there are 4 techniques which I'm sharing again, which can help you in the moment in a conversation. So somebody says, right, there are so many mistakes happening in this process. I really don't know what to do about it. I'm very upset. Now, that could be a conversation that's happening with a process owner, or that could be a audit head telling you, telling a team member or whatever, or a team member could be feeling very upset. Now, a reframing basically is a technique that takes a difficult situation and turns it to an opportunity. So the fact that mistakes are happening shows that you are trying, right? Where else have you had an experience of going from mistakes to success through this process? By reframing the fact that the mistakes are a sign of positive effort. If you're not doing anything about it, you can't be making mistakes. So the fact that your team is making mistakes actually shows that they're trying. Now, the fact that they're trying, how can you take the effort of the trying and now shift it? Find the positive first. Why find the positive first? It releases oxytocin. The moment they get there, so try reframing. Reframing is a technique of basically looking for the positive in a difficult situation, using that to release oxytocin and shifting them to use that new perspective to now see what can we find a new way forward, common ground, trust with another person. So that's reframing. Another technique is refocusing. It enables you to elevate a person from a place where they are stuck and point them towards a larger picture where they can see new connections. So let's say somebody is doing reconciliation after reconciliation, stuck, unhappy, it's not reconciling, etc. If you can ask them to step, as an auditor, you can have a conversation with somebody during your audit process and say, what is this part of? Let's refocus and look at the big picture. All these things that you guys are trying to do, what is it part of? What's the bigger picture of the process? What is the actual intended outcome? If you can have this conversation, even I can promise you, even if you have it with the ground guys who are doing the process, what is this part of? Not many people have asked them that question. I'm sure they get an SOP, they're doing their, everyday work. Of course, the leaders have a different perspective, but if you can refocus people from where they're stuck to a larger picture, new things start to emerge. Oh, wow, I can do it this way instead. I can try something else. I don't know why I'm doing this. It actually doesn't have any value to my big picture. That's the kind of clarity that comes when you refocus. This is what happens when you are these are techniques I'm suggesting to you to use when you are in the middle of a tough conversation or a conversation that needs to have some new energy infused into it. Another one is redirecting. Helps a person to move from a place of being stuck or emotionally bound to a place where they can see new opportunities. So this is somebody who says, I always get, let's say an auditee is going, I always get nervous before going into a presentation, right? Now you redirect this person to talk about some of the things where they have been successful. Tell me, okay, or that's one angle, or tell me what kind of person do you want to be when it comes to presenting your observations? What is it that you can do to get there? This is a conversation between a manager and a team member, for example. Or if you're talking to a process owner and they're saying, every time we try and implement this control, it doesn't succeed. What is the kind of team you want to run? What are some of the key parameters for this team to succeed? What needs to change so that this team succeeds? It takes them away from that stuck place of the failure and talks about change. Change is always positive. So this is some of the techniques that you can use when somebody's stuck in a conversation and always looking at because remember they're in amygdala. When they are stuck, upset, emotionally bound, they are having amygdala activation and cortisol release. You want to take them to an oxytocin release. And the other one, very, very interesting, right? There's so many words today in the world. There's so many words that each of us, if we had to write the meaning of a word, we would all have different meanings. Yet we assume that what another person says is what we understood. Or what they meant is what we understood. So double clicking is basically asking them, hey, you use this word. It could even be a word like, my team is lacking energy. What you think of energy and what they think of energy could be actually extremely different. So if a process owner says, I keep trying to improve this team, but they're lacking energy. Instead of you thinking, okay, he's looking at somebody being extra and energetic and jumping around and doing things with enthusiasm, maybe that's not what they meant. So double clicking is another use of a technique in conversations, saying, hey, what do you actually mean by that? And sometimes, in fact, nowadays people use the word double clicking. Do you mind if I double click? If we double click on that word, is a way of asking that meaning. Can we please double click on that word connection? What do you mean? Or the word energy, what do you mean? So if you are having a conversation with somebody and there's some jargon going on and you're afraid to ask, don't be afraid. Double click, get clarity. And when you double click and ask them what exactly it means, you will be surprised how much you can enter their world, because that double clicking opens up this space for sharing much more about their world with you. And that creates a deeper connection. So that's actually the end of my presentation. I know we had some questions. Let me just check that if, 1 minute. Sorry. Where are these questions? Okay. I have one question. Could you please share your views on what's making difficult conversations? I think I've answered that conversation, Kritika. Basically, difficult conversations happens when people have individual agendas. That causes difficult conversations. Difficult conversations happens when people have two different realities. They think they have the same reality, but they have two different realities because, like I already clarified, completely different narrative going on in each person's mind. And when we try and sync up those narratives, they don't match. And we don't take effort to align and close the gap. Then you end up having a difficult conversation. And, those of you who are married, I can guarantee you spousal conversations are one of those where the realities don't match up very often. So happens in all of our conversational spaces, right? Disconnects because of how we process the world and how we react then to others. I think that was the only question that came up. Let me just refresh this to see if there's anything else. Oh yeah. Other things were just saying, great presentation. Thank you very much. I don't have anything else. Aarti, if we want, we can wrap up.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for such an informative and energetic session. Now, I would like to thank our participants for attending this said webinar, our chairman and vice chairman for organizing this said webinar, my team, and as well as the technical team who is handling this said session. Thank you, ma'am. Bye.
Been a pleasure with meeting all of you, and hope you all took something valuable from it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aarti, ma'am.